I got married at 24. We knew each other for about a year beforehand. So I was 23 when we met. We've been divorced or separated for 5 years almost. I started that process about a week after he came out. So we didn't stay together for all of that long. It was interesting because it came about as more of a BDSM thing. And I was sort of desensitized from that because of like mainstream TV that I was watching. And I didn't want to be a prude. I wanted to be like that cool girl. So I didn't even really recognize it as that's what it was, or that's what it could progress into. It's just like a certain category where they want a dominant woman. And so I told myself, well, oh, okay, so like strong woman, feminism, like, that kind of mentality was where I was. Everything happened super gradual, and it was definitely porn fueled. I know a lot of women have that experience too, not even with just the trans thing, but they'll notice their husband asking for new things and they're like, where's this coming from? Well, that's where it's coming from. And like 100 years ago, when there wasn't pornography, that exploration would be just a much different experience than it is now, because now we're having those experiences more and more online. It's almost like in order to get excited, they have to be disgusted. But after a while, those things aren't even disgusting anymore. The spitting on someone isn't disgusting. So now they're moving into choking. And now they're moving into this other thing and this other thing. And it just gets more and more horrific as it goes. And it's that neural pathway that, our bodies were designed to experience bonding and love with other human beings. And part of that beautiful design is with birth and with sex, we release oxytocin, and that's a bonding and love hormone. And so when we're using that system, we're hijacking it ourselves really by participating in pornography. And we're just causing those hormones to surge during disgusting acts of violence. A lot of the times is what it ends up going into. I probably didn't start that way. It probably did start as something normal and natural, but we are in such a disconnected place that becomes so real to us. Several years into our marriage, when I was considering leaving the first time, when his family confided in me that there were things like that happening in early adolescence even. But a lot of that was porn driven too. They had a computer in his room, and, computers and internet back then were new. Not every family had them at all. Like, they were in a privileged place to have a thing like that, and no one knew how to use it or regulate it for their kids. And so yeah, they just left it in there, even when they would find things and, inordinate amounts of money and stuff was being spent. Most people can put aside some of those fetishes, if you will, even at first, just because it is new and that there's that exciting element. So that wasn't a part of it right away. Asking about what, each other's fantasies are and things like that. That's when I became aware of it. It didn't scare me away prior to, making the commitment to marriage, because I had been desensitized to the idea of it as mainstream. It wasn't that I was into it. It wasn't that it was even required at first. It was just more of a conversation, and the conversation just didn't scare me based on other things I had seen. I just didn't recognize the progressive nature of things like that. And I didn't realize the extent of the relationship he already had with pornography. I had knowledge that it existed. I had a feminist, a liberal feminist perspective that said, Playboy was empowering. So it made sense to me. It felt okay, even though it wasn't my thing. So the number one thing that I wish I had noticed I used to write a lot. I would keep a lot of journals, and I really believe in the healing benefits of just writing out your thoughts. He would read my journals. He would find them and read them. And so I stopped keeping them. And when I stopped keeping the journals, I let go of my grounding, where I would be like, this just happened. And wow, it's wild. And I could look back on that later and say, this happened. Like, look, I wrote it down. But when I stopped doing that, and then I would say to him, this thing happened, he'd go, no, it didn't. And hearing, no, it didn't, enough times without anything to go back and say, yes, it did. Look, I wrote it down. I know what my memory is, and I can trust it, and I can trust myself. I let that go. In letting that go, I just allowed myself to be manipulated little by little, more and more, because I just wasn't sure. Well, maybe my memory is bad. Maybe I am being paranoid about the amount of time you're spending online, even though last week I found, hours and hours worth of chats between you and this chick that you ended up meeting. This week, maybe I am being paranoid. I was newly married when a lot of this was coming up, and I didn't want to tell all of my girlfriends at the time, like, who were also just then getting married, and everyone's excited, in that young age, wherever we were at. I was just too embarrassed to say what was happening. So I wasn't seeking support outside, and I wasn't having that grounding within myself. And that happened almost immediately within the first month or so of being married. So, and then even before that, the first time I found pornography or chats was about a month before I got married. And I did try to leave, or I was going to walk away. He got down on his knees and begged me not to. I forgave him. And then as we were flying down to our wedding, he brings up that it's no big deal and I should have never been upset about it in the first place. I literally had strangers who overheard the conversation, who happened to be at our resort, come up to me and tell me not to marry him. I had apologized, got me back on his side, and then it was manipulating me into believing that my boundaries shouldn't exist and they were stupid, and everyone would think they were stupid. I would talk to people about it from time to time and then be told that all men do this. It's not a big deal. It's just porn, or it's just the internet. Like, I'd be like, well, it's not necessarily even. He's like, met people. They're like, wow, men. When we first got married, I was the only one working. He was the victim of the downtrodden economy. But I was working, and I was like, well, go work for free, be an apprentice, like do whatever, follow your dreams. I love you. And he didn't. He sat at home watching porn instead and claiming that, it was the economy. When he was finally working, it financially made more sense for me to stay home with our kids. Even though I wasn't sleeping and I was pregnant or nursing for 6 years straight, he never once woke up for a feeding or any of those things. And I did all the house stuff. Like, we separated out by sex stereotypes. He felt like I still owed him for his willingness to support us. He accused me. He's like, you seem tired. I don't even understand why you would be tired. And like, well, I mean, I've got a lot of kids. And he's like, a lot of people have that. He's able to go to work without worrying about childcare. He's able to get a second job if he wanted or desired. He has evenings free. He's got weekends to himself, and time to indulge in all sorts of other things, where what I bring to the table is for the kids, and my time is dedicated to the kids, or I'm juggling childcare responsibilities. I had told myself that I couldn't leave because of financial things. I'd also, just put in so much time. I think sometimes when we make a mistake, like, even if we are aware that it's a mistake, we'll just keep making it because, to switch courses requires a lot of humility. The one time I actually left I found out shortly after I was pregnant again. And I like I said, I convinced myself that I couldn't be a single mom of 2 kids. Lo and behold, I can definitely be a single mom of more than 2 kids. So I had just disempowered myself so much because I absorbed so much of what others, say about how we're supposed to be living. I wanted to stay married. It was a look. I took a workshop some time ago. They said like there's 4 reasons you stay in situations that are bad, and it's because you're comfortable, because you want to be right, because you want to look good, and because you want to have control. I would say I definitely wanted to save face. I did not want to go through a divorce and struggling with small children and things like that. So there's definitely a conversation with me like that. There was being right. Like I didn't, like I said, making mistakes. When we spend a long time making a mistake, it can be really humbling to have to step away from that. So, there were psychological barriers on my end that I wish I had gotten through without this needing to be necessarily the reason that catapulted me. But, that it is what it is. I just kind of thought, so now the lies and stuff will stop. We can be honest. At the time, he had also talked about things like open marriages and stuff like that. And so I was like, oh, well, maybe, an unconventional open relationship is what we would need. Because I recognized even in that moment that I was straight. And he knew it too. So like there wasn't going to be a situation where I was going to be happy in that type of dynamic. So, and that was what was interesting too later when he claimed that I had been a lesbian the whole time and that I was a gender fetishist and things like that. That was an interesting move because I was being expected to respect him. In the 8.5 years we were together, there was so many other painful things that had gone on. And I thought that this was what was going to be the healing serum. This was the problem the whole time. And now that it's been discovered, everything will magically heal itself and get better. And it became really apparent really quickly that was not the case, that this was just more of the same. As the relationship progressed, as his relationship to pornography progressed, his desires also progressed. And then about 2 years before he came out, I was pregnant with my 3rd baby, and I found the sissy hypno stuff. And it came to a point where I bowed out. Once that had happened, I know it kept progressing because there were still conversations that would come up. He knew why I didn't feel safe anymore because I had found out about prostitutes and things like that. So that was my, easy. I didn't even have to use his desires as my reasoning. I just said, I don't feel safe with you. He also would bring up things like cuckolding. That kind of stuff started coming up at the very end. And I think that comes from the sissy hypno porn. And then the desire to live vicariously through me at the time. I think that was the final progression for him, is when he had wanted to put himself into my shoes and ask me to go pick up strange men and bring them home. And I was absolutely not going to do that. That was just never. I was married for the reason that I wanted to be monogamous. So that didn't make any sense to me, and I never wanted to participate in that either. But looking back, that certainly was something that he had picked up in that time frame where we were no longer being intimate, but that he was still heavily participating in that type of pornography. I just kind of had to detach. I had two other kids. I mean, they were under 4, and I was pregnant with the third. And I just had to take care of what I was taking care of and stop ever looking at what he was doing. That's like our relationship, just stopped basically in any intimate way at that point. And I couldn't keep finding things. I couldn't keep violating my own boundaries. Fortunately for me, he was so involved in that. I started going to yoga, and I found other outlets. I built friendships and things because I just recognized it was in a lost cause, but I was also financially dependent. So I wasn't prepared to leave or do things like that either. I don't know what would have happened if I had left earlier, right? Because part of it, he probably felt, like I said, enabled, like I was giving him the time he needed to indulge in this. Not that that's my fault either, but there was some of that. And I think had I left sooner, he may not have come out as quickly or at all. I don't know. It happened to be summer, and there's pride parades all over. And I encourage him to go to one of those and meet people. In that week that I was trying, he was off meeting all these people, he was excited, and there was like all of this happening. I was not allowed to tell anybody. So I was devastated. I was grieving. I was confused. I wanted to be supportive. He was ecstatic, and I was sad, and I wasn't allowed to tell anybody. And he kind of saw that, and he's like, okay, he gave me 2 approved people that I was allowed to tell. So he was controlling the entire thing, like down to where I was allowed to get my support. And one of the people I was allowed to tell, his response was, your kids are going to need so much therapy. And even I was like, oh, I didn't want to hear that. Like, that was a fear that I was having, but I made the mistake of telling my husband at the time that that's what was said. And he got irate. I mean, just super angry at me for this other person's reaction. And it was a person he had approved that I tell. So he laughed, very angry at me, stormed out of the house, and was gone for like hours. And I guess in that time, he was also mad that I didn't run after him. But I didn't. I just went to bed and, let him process what he had to process, I guess. And he then came out on Facebook in the middle of the night, and our friends and family all found out that way. I never got the chance to seek support because then at that point they were frustrated I hadn't told them, or, they were just so in shock. So he negated my entire support system immediately upon doing that, because that had been his intention the whole time, to keep me isolated and dependent on him. His manipulations and controlling ways that didn't stop with the coming out. Right after that Facebook incident, and I said, you've got to move out. We can't, we've got to figure out a way here. And he was eager to move out because then he could have an apartment and just do whatever he wanted. Right. So he was fine with that. And all of his money was going into that. And he'd claim that. But I still had access to the bank accounts. I could see what was happening. And he'd give me maybe like $100 for like a 2-week period to feed 3 kids and pay the bills and stuff like that. And I'd see bills coming in from our bank account from makeup companies and clothing things. And he said he had to have these things. I couldn't buy diapers and pads at the same time. I had to make choices like that. That was when I filed an emergency injunction. So I was super fortunate. Not everyone can do that. I filed an emergency injunction right away because I realized he doesn't get to decide here how much we're worth. Like, that's why our court system here in the US is set up the way that it is. because this kind of thing happens. It's not always trans stuff, but men leave their stay-at-home wives, and when you're making those choices together in a marriage, it's not like someone's just becoming lazy. That's not even what's going on. You're building a life together. My being at home with the kids meant he never had to take a sick day when they were sick. It meant, he never had to take them to a doctor's appointment or any of these other things that would have required him to take time off of work. And as a result, he was able to be promoted and earn more and things like that. So my labor within that relationship is a financial gain on his part. And luckily, our court systems a lot of times take that into account. I saw through him at this point. So I knew none of this had to do with kids. None of the fighting he was willing to do had anything to do with the family. It was all money. So I gave him whatever he wanted for the most part, as long as I got what I needed to care for the kids until I was able to get on my feet. I gave him a lot. And part of, I think, the incentive for him was a name change in being able to start filing those documents right away. So he didn't fight too much either. But I knew that giving him 50-50 custody, he was never going to use it or take it. I'm sure not everyone's in that same position, but I felt comfortable doing that to avoid a fight, knowing that I would still be the one in charge of the kids. And now looking back, when I see other women struggling with infidelity issues, even it doesn't have to be gender specific, I see myself in them, and I see why it was so hard, because you hold on to this hope that this man's going to become the fairy tale prince that you were promised as you were growing up, in a society telling you that existed. And for me, once the reality set in that was never going to happen, it was like, and my life got way better letting go of him. When I speak out, it's not necessarily even just to trans widows, but to women experiencing their husbands or their partners treating them in crappy ways. Letting go of that is so beneficial. So at the beginning, there was a lot of forcing of the term mom, no matter how difficult it was. One of my kids shared a name with him. So there would be like questions about like, why did you do that? And anytime he questioned it, he was yelled at and told that someone hateful must have been feeding this into his mind. I, as a boundary to myself, put an end to that. And I said, you can call him by his new name. In high school, I read A Brave New World in 1984. I mean, they talk very specifically about turning kids against their parents. The word mother being profane in one of the books, in fact. So like, I think they've given us the blueprint for their intentions, honestly, on how this looks. And the breakdown of that relationship between kids and their parents, I think, is a crucial part of getting people away from support systems that would protect them from these types of ideologies. The way that we're seeing in schools right now, that teachers are given the authority to keep significant secrets from the family, is wild. And then we have a lot, like Florida is trying to stop them from doing that, and people are really angry about it. So some of the teachers have decided they'll just stop using terms like mother altogether, and thinking it's okay in the guise of compassion. Our compassion's being used against us too. So these like really lovely systems we have within us as people are being manipulated and used against us. To my son's teacher, for instance, was not going to have a Father's Day party after they had a huge Mother's Day celebration. Okay. They weren't going to have a Father's Day party because my son didn't have a father. That was what she told me. It was out of compassion for my son that all men, all fathers didn't matter anymore. And I was like, wait, my son, I hope one day he's a father and he's got, other men in his life that he could celebrate. Why would you do that? And she's like, oh, well, I guess I hadn't even thought of that. And so it wasn't even necessarily her fault. She was trying to be nice. And sometimes us women can be so nice, we'll end up, destroying ourselves over it. And I actually think that's kind of what's happening. I think most men here are like, whoa, like why? But they also aren't going to defend our right to use the word mother. They're not erasing the word men. And so they're only erasing mother. You'll see like gender neutral bathrooms in men's rooms. Like that's the kinds of thing we're witnessing now. Or you'll hear about trans women and birthing people in the same sentence. Like they are owning this word because they own things. That's what men do. Even if we don't like our mothers, even if our mothers left us, whatever our relationship is to our mothers is so impactful. And disengaging that relationship is another way to disconnect us so that we will seek out the state support. We'll seek out support of these corporations and we'll fill that hole within us with pharmaceuticals and cosmetics and consuming, whatever that looks like. But I think that you've got to get rid of women and you've got to get rid of mother because of every single human being's relationship to their mother, to the women in their lives. And if we can downplay that, then no relationships really matter. Rather than supporting my son and saying, wow, you've experienced a really significant loss not having a dad. Let's show you what a good example of fatherhood is like. Maybe you'll meet a mentor. Instead of that, their willingness to say, okay, let's just pretend this relationship doesn't matter at all. I think it actually causes dissociation rather than validating that this is a difficult thing you're going through. Get to do FaceTime every week. There's minimal visits, but visits happen every once in a while. I feel like we don't get to pick our parents, and we all have to kind of deal with who our parents were and like where we've come from, and that's just part of it. I don't want my kids thinking that half of who they are is horrible and hateful, and I want them to love both their parents and learn to just be accepting of other human beings as much as they can while maintaining their own boundaries. And I think that's been the biggest lesson for me. And I think most women who are socialized in this world, that we've been taught to just violate our boundaries to support others, where that's not necessary. We can maintain both things. And in fact, sometimes like supporting people is more of an enabling than anything. It's not even necessarily good for them. This is one of the problems with us not being able to speak in an honest way, is it is so easy for your own brain to start violating yourself in your reality if you start to go down that road. We spent all this time saying women could do whatever we wanted, and then we're turning around and doubling down on whoever's cleaning the house is a woman. Rather, like, what? No, that doesn't make any sense. Like, it's wild to me. I don't understand that. And so for my kids, like, I want them to enjoy their interests, whatever they are, and love their bodies at the same time. Part of me thinks that if my ex-husband had been supported in some of those interests, in the ability to be a homosexual man, I think this could have been avoided. I think some of it does have to do with believing so wholeheartedly that any interest in those areas meant something about him. And other than just, I'm attracted to men, or I like to wear this outfit. I don't think you can innately be in a wrong body. At some point, a child is actually feeling like their body is wrong. Something significant is happening in their world that's causing them to disassociate. I've witnessed a lot of children, and they just have a sense of wonder about the world. They're not worried about the bodies they're in, unless it's, they've fallen and a knee hurts or something like that. Like, unless there is something that causes them to think of that body part, they're not thinking about that. They're exploring their world. And so I would be concerned about anyone's child who felt they needed to disassociate in that way from their body. Just that's an alarming concept. If anything's innate, it's interests and things like that people say this interest means. They place meaning on it. Playing soccer means that you're a boy, and dancing means that you're a girl. That's a meaning that we're placing on those activities, which I do think is a travesty. I do. I think parents should be raising the kids they've got, not the kids they want. That later on, it becomes an accusation on wives that they've emasculated them to the point of this, or this or that, when in reality, they always had the control. They were the ones kind of guiding the ship, so to speak. That's an oddity to me, that the idea that we've emasculated them, when honestly, most of the women in that situation are being controlled in that way. They're not even allowed to talk about it, and they're dealing with shame and confusion and no support within that space. The whole idea that we would have grief, or that there would be confusion, is seen as bigoted, which is odd, because they presented themselves as one way to us. And so it's not like we were aware of all these other interests going in, and it was a deceptive measure on their part to keep those things from us. A lot of women in situations like mine are aware of things like cross-dressing, and they're not even like a thought in the mind of this person at the time, but they're forced to keep secrets for them. There's one thing to hold a confidence for somebody. It's another to demand that you keep secrets about something you're going through. So I would like to ask why my abusive ex-husband's feelings are more important than my lived reality. An answer for that would be beautiful, because no one can actually answer that. They'll dance around it because no one wants to admit that's exactly what they're saying, by pushing me to take on labels like lesbian in order to respect his label as a woman. J.K. Rowling has a quote that rock bottom is a great place to launch off from. And this was before I ever knew her involvement in any of the trans stuff. So I was fangirling on her long before that. But that quote, really. So when everything is lost and you have to eat that humble pie because you've made a mistake for a really long time and now you've got to go through it, that spot down there, that is the spot where you get to recreate and redefine what's important. I think that's a great spot to really notice where your old patterns were, where we were seeking love. You don't have to stay in that situation. That just to be considered non-hateful or anything like that, because honestly, you'll probably be labeled that at some point anyways. So, going through it right up front may be your best option in this. Anyone who's experiencing abuse or infidelity, it's not getting better. That person sees your level of treatment and then it's just going to keep increasing it. And the only way they would get help is if they wanted it. You can't force anyone else into that. Even in those little ways where you're just keeping secrets and feeling shame, because those things will really dig at you and it'll impact your health and the way you raise your kids and everything else. When I was strong enough, I could start inviting in relationships, and I decided to go for women that were also in that same situation, where they were empowering themselves. They weren't talking negatively about other women. They weren't hypersexualizing themselves. They cared enough to care for themselves. We're so willing to put our children and our husbands and everyone above us. But we really don't have anything to give to them if we're not taking care of ourselves. And so surrounding myself with other women that were like that was a life-changing experience. It took me many years, but at this point, I'm even able to, try to invite in another romantic relationship, but it has taken a super long time. And I think we as women have put such an importance on that, as opposed to sisterhood and friendships, so that those women around you can go, hey, this looks a little fishy, or you're not, like this, I'm seeing this for you. And I just want to let you know. I think that's so important. We're raised in a mean girl situation where women are seen as competitors and things like that. And so many of us have gotten sucked into that, like I said, the hypersexualization, being desirable to a man is where we place our worth. And it's just so not the case. My favorite parts of life are meeting literally in the woods with a lot of other mothers and letting our kids explore their world and be who they are and play with nature, be connected to unman-made things, Mother Nature things, these things that we're told are not good. Cooking dinner with these women and just feeding our kids like we live in that village from back in the day has hands down been the most healing thing that has ever happened to me. And I think that I would wish that for every woman. I did such a disservice to myself in not creating those relationships with women so much earlier in life. I just bought into like the whole competitive nature thing. People I considered my friends would talk badly behind my back and things like. So I thought that I had a warped vision of friendship and sisterhood. Like men have that in brotherhood. They have that, and that's probably how they've dominated so much in all of this. And I think that's why they are threatening our spaces together, because they recognize how important that is. So even if you're feeling alone, just reach out. There are so many people that want to lift, women that want to lift you, and can help you from that rock bottom place, because it's a great launching off point. It's better on the other side.